The last video looked at just some basic examples to illustrate the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about in social deviance as the course. What I want to do now is give you the first part of what is going to be a two-part series on some of the history of the sociology of deviance or social deviance or criminology of deviance, whatever perspective we're coming from here. It's all really the same. So when we're talking about the history of any field or any type of study of anything, it's really hard to identify one starting point, like this is the moment when people started talking about deviance. There's no real way to do that. So I'm picking what is essentially an arbitrary point. It's a particularly important point from the perspective of sociology and criminology. So just, that's why I'm starting here. But, obviously there is more in the past. This isn't something that people just never talked about before. But for our purposes, we're going to start with a guy named Emil Durkheim. And if you're a sociology or crim major, you almost certainly run into some kind of discussion of Emil Durkheim. If you're not a crim or sociology major, you probably have not heard of him. But he is a major figure in sociology/criminology. So Durkheim I have his lifespan there, 1858 to 1917. At no point are you going to have to memorize his lifespan. I just give you that to put him in historical context. But so Durkheim was an interesting guy in the history of the discipline. He existed in a time where sociology, which is where criminology comes from, sociology didn't exist. And so he was essentially this founder of sociology in France. So in other parts of Europe, there were other people who were more responsible for the rise of Karl Marx, Max Weber. But in France, Durkheim. And he wanted to make the argument that a field like sociology was worthy of existing. Before Durkheim in France, the kinds of problems that sociologists study now, things like social interaction, social structure, that kind of thing, people look at them, but more from the perspectives of philosophy or psychology or even things like biology. But Durkheim made the argument that no, we need to look at this from the level of societies. And what he did is what a lot of people do. When you're trying to convince a bunch of people that your new way of thinking about something is useful, what you can do and what people often do is attack a perspective that's popular already. So when Durkheim was writing, there is this philosophy that's really pretty dominant in the dialogue about society and individual action and just all the things that we think about now in terms of sociology and criminology. So a lot of the conversation was dominated by this philosophy of utilitarianism. We actually still see utilitarianism, especially if you're taking a lot of economics classes. The terminology is different. So if you run into conversation about rationality or rational choice in like an economics class or a political science class, they're really talking about this argument, but it's a more modern day form. So Durkheim starts off by criticizing utilitarianism to say, hey, a lot of people believe this, but it's wrong. And here's why my argument is better. So I really want to point out, because it's easy to miss this, Durkheim disagreed with the utilitarians, okay? He is arguing against them. But before we can really get into his argument, want to talk about, just briefly, what utilitarianism is, what it argues. So there are four major points that I'm going to emphasize anyway. I don't want to say this is all of utilitarianism, but these are the major points that I'm going to focus on. So first, there's the argument that human action, everything we do, right? Every choice you make, every action you engage in, everything you do from moment to moment is driven by one desire, and that desire is to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. And it's to maximize your pleasure and minimize your pain. We tend now, especially if you go to, an economics class, this is going to be phrased differently. Instead of pleasure and pain, it's going to be costs and benefits. So we want to maximize benefits and minimize costs. So what this means essentially is that we are pleasure-seeking animals and we are pain avoidant. All right. So at any given moment, you make decisions or you make the decision that will bring you the most pleasure at the lowest cost with the lowest amount of pain. So thinking. So we think, we are human animals, so we think, but the way we think, even if we don't realize it, the way we think is calculative. We're always calculating something. Well, what are we calculating? We're calculating the pleasure and pain associated with different options that we have available. So for instance, you are watching this video right now, presumably. But there's a whole bunch of things you could be doing right now. You don't have to be watching this video. Now, technically for class, yeah, you're supposed to do it, right? But do you really have to? No. You could be watching TV. You could be calling friends. You could be, this is the part of the lecture where I usually say, you could be hanging out with friends, but we live in the COVID world, so that's less likely. But you could be on a Zoom call with friends. You could hop on a plane, take a trip somewhere. You could do all kinds of stuff other than watching this. But in this moment, you made the mental calculation that watching this video is going to bring you the most pleasure at the lowest cost. Keep in mind that this doesn't mean that watching this video is the most fun thing you could be doing. It just means that out of all of your options, you did this mental calculation. You thought, all right, if I use my credit card to buy a plane ticket to head to somewhere warm and sunny, it would give me this much pleasure and there'd be this much pain. So pain, like the amount of money it would cost, the fact that you'd be missing class, that sort of thing. You thought about the pleasure and pain associated with sleeping, right? Like you get the pleasure of sleeping because sleeping is it's the best, right? It's just great, I'm gonna say. But there's the pain of missing class, missing out on the opportunity to do other things. And watching this video has pleasure and pain associated with it as well, right? So the pleasure or the benefit is that you get the information that you might need for an exam or for the discussion board posts or for whatever it is that you need to do. I'm also hoping that you'd like to learn about some of this stuff, and that hopefully this video does a good job of kind of mildly entertaining you, I hope. So there's the potential pleasure of things like learning, but there's real pain too. So first, there's the actual cost of taking the class. It's not free. You have to pay for it, or someone has to pay for it. But maybe you're sitting there watching this video and you're just like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to watch this video. Oh, I'm tired. Sleep. I just want to sleep. Or you're hungry or whatever. That's a cost. Being bored is a cost. You could be working right now. You could be making money, but instead you're watching this video. Unless you're watching it at work, in which case, bravo. But when you make the choice to watch this video or not, you are taking all of the options that are available to you, and you are, without realizing it, assigning costs and benefits to all of them, and then you are making a choice. You made the choice to watch this. So again, it's not about the most pleasure. Just to give you a kind of an example, if we were always searching for the most possible pleasure in any given moment, which is sometimes how people kind of misexplain or get utilitarianism wrong. If we were always searching for the most pleasure and we weren't taking into account pain, then we would act very differently. So, for instance, I have heard that heroin is a lot of fun. I have heard that if you inject heroin, you will have a really, 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 really good time for a little while. But in the long run, there's a lot of pain cost associated with it. That's why we're not always shooting up heroin constantly every day. Hopefully never. That's a bad drug. I'm not going to give like anti-drug messages in this class. Actually, quite the opposite at times. But heroin bad. Always don't touch it. So we're not maximizing pleasure. We're maximizing pleasure while minimizing pain. Next thing is the argument that people are free. People have the freedom to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. This is very much a perspective that says we have free will. So you make the choice. It's up to you to decide what best maximizes your pleasure and minimizes your pain. So you always have a choice. Now that choice might not seem like you have a choice, or you might say to yourself that you have to do a particular thing. So for instance, you might say, I would rather be watching TV or napping or hanging out with loved ones or doing whatever, but I have to watch the video for my Deviance class. But do you really have to? No, you don't. You could not do it. You could turn this off right now, right? No one's physically forcing you to watch this. But when we say that, I have to watch the video for class, what you're essentially saying is that the way the costs and benefits are set up, this is the best choice for me. I might not be enjoying it. I hope you are, but might not be enjoying it. But you feel really strongly that this is the best option, but you don't have to. Similarly, words are hard. And I could edit that out and fix it, but editing videos is, I'm learning, harder than saying the word similarly. God. I need like a blooper reel. But anyway, so to give another example, I have a child. He is 13. I have had the joy and excitement of raising him and seeing him grow, but also having a child is kind of a nightmare because they're gross and annoying, and they always want things like food and shelter. And so it can be really frustrating sometimes. I mean, on the whole, it's great. My kid is awesome. He's like the best kid. But, sometimes I just want him to like go away. Thankfully, he is not here right now as I am recording this. Although I'm thinking he might watch this at some point, but he'll probably get a kick out of it, or it'll destroy our relationship. Either way, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. But anyway, so he right now is pretty independent. So he goes to school, he comes home, he does that stuff on his own. But when he was little, so when he's like 4, 5, 6, 7 in elementary school, I would say I can't talk on the phone, or I can't meet a friend, or I can't teach a class because I have to go pick up my son from school. But here's the thing. Do I really have to pick up my son from school? I don't. Now, there are definite costs to not picking up my son from school. But if I'm prepared to deal with those costs, I don't have to pick up my kid from school. I can just leave him there. I can get in my car and I can drive far, far away. Now, there are costs to me. I think about my child being upset. I think about the fact that the Department of Social Services is probably not going to be too happy with me. Their community is going to be angry with me. There are costs, but I am still making a decision based on the costs and benefits, right? It's still my choice. Even something as extreme as somebody coming up to you and putting a gun to your head and saying, "Give me all of your money or I will kill you." From this perspective, you are making a choice to hand over your money because you don't have to, right? You could try to fight the person. You could just say, "No, I'm not going to do that." You could do any number of things. You could start singing a song. You could start dancing. You could start crying and then like you could do all kinds of things, but you don't have to give the person your money. Now we say, "Oh, I have to," but you really don't. Okay. If you make the decision to not give your money to the person threatening to kill you, you face the cost of potentially getting killed. But maybe you make the choice that you want to fight, right? So even then, the argument is that we are making choices. Last implication of this is that society then, or what we think of as society, is not real. Society is just a collection of individuals who are all trying to maximize their own self-interest, because this is all about self-interest. You're trying to maximize your own pleasure and minimize your own pain. So there's no social order, there's no social rules or norms. What we think of as this ordered society is really just a bunch of individual people acting in their own interest, and through everybody's individual pursuit of their own interest, this illusion of this thing called society forms. But there really is no social system, there's no social order. It's just people acting individually. Which, remember, Durkheim is making an argument for sociology as a discipline, and that's a field that argues that society matters and it's real. So he is going to respond to this. So this is his jumping off point, and he is going to critique the perspective. Oh, sorry, I'm gonna looking for a thing. Where's the control? Whatever. So there is a problem with this argument that Durkheim points out. And, it's one of these things where I think the utilitarian argument is superficially convincing, right? It's really, you hear that, yeah, we make decisions based on costs and benefits, or like what gives us pleasure, and we want to avoid pain. All that sounds very intuitive, and it sounds like it's going to be, like it's easy to be convinced by. But when you think about it, there are big problems, okay, which we're going to talk about next. So the problem is, according to Durkheim, is that people don't act like this. People do not act in the way that you would expect them to if we were trying to maximize our benefits and minimize our costs. We don't maximize pleasure and minimize pain, or at least that's what Durkheim is going to argue. We often act in ways that do not maximize our pleasure and do not minimize our pain, despite, again, the intuitive appeal of something like utilitarianism. So I'm going to give you an example to illustrate. The example I'm giving you, though, is not Durkheim's example. It's an example that that I kind of connected to this, but I think it's a really good one, and I think it really illustrates the point that Durkheim's trying to make here. It's also just a really fascinating historical thing. And the example starts with this guy, Jonathan Swift. So this is old-timey, 1667 to 1745, so he's writing quite a while ago. He's got a very silly wig. But, that was the norm at the time for people of his social class. And he was a writer, author, but he was also a satirist. And he was a real critic of the way his society was uh, operating. Right? I know it, like in this picture, it's such a strange image for us in the modern time to look at him, but he was this guy who was really concerned about people's well-being and the poor, at least to much more of an extent than other people were in his time. And he's British. That's important. So one of his most famous pieces of work it's not a book. It's more of like it's a little longer than a pamphlet, but so it's a short essay, and it's generally referred to as A Modest Proposal, but its full title is A Modest Proposal for Preventing the Children of Poor People from Being a Burden to Their Parents or the Country, and for Making Them Beneficial to the Public. So, yeah, it's a pretty. There's a lot to unpack there. This is satire, right? So he is not actually advocating what he's writing here. It's a satire. It really is a form of mockery. It makes fun of ideas, but in these kind of subtle ways. But if you look at the title, along with the different like spellings that people had back in the day, A Modest Proposal for Preventing the Children of Poor People. So right there, it's like the children of poor people. We need to prevent them from being a burden to their parents, the country, and let's make them beneficial. So there's this implication that poor kids are a burden to their parents, the country, and we need to do something to make them beneficial to everybody. And he starts off with what seems like, he's like he starts off the essay by presenting himself as someone who's really concerned about the plight of the poor. Right? He really is. He wants to make an argument that he's going to say is this is for the benefit of everybody. It's for the benefit of the poor. It's for the benefit of society as a whole. It's for the benefit of everybody. And so, bear with me. I'm going to read quite a bit of this. You should read the entire essay. It's kind of amazing. Oh, sorry, I'm trying to move something. There we go. So he writes, "It is a melancholy object." Just back up, say that again. Like words are hard. "It is a melancholy object to those who walk through this great town or travel in the country when they see the streets, the roads, and cabin doors crowded with beggars of the female sex, followed by 3, 4, or 6 children, all in rags and importuning every passenger for alms. These mothers, instead of being able to work for their honest livelihood, are forced to employ all their time in strolling to beg sustenance for their helpless infants, who, as they grow up, either turn thieves for want of work or leave their dear native country to fight for the pretender in Spain or sell themselves to the Barbados." So right there, he's saying that, doesn't it make you sad? Don't you feel bad when you are walking down the streets and you see these women begging by the side of the road because they have 3, 4, 5, 6 kids that they need to feed? These poor women, they can't work, they can't make a livelihood because they are burdened by all these children. And these children are useless. They're not helping anybody. They're just harms, right? So they grow up, they can't find work, and so they turn to thievery, or they go fight in a foreign war, or they have to sell themselves into slavery or indentured servitude. Isn't that so sad? Don't you feel bad about that? Now, you have to know that at the time, he's writing about Ireland, so he's British, and he's writing about Ireland and the streets of Ireland. Ireland was had been colonized by the British and had been oppressing the hell out of Ireland for quite a while. And so one of the major reasons why there's all this poverty is because of the British subjugation of the Irish. But he's not presenting that here. the British upper class and the British as a whole looked down on the poor in Ireland, just like we tend to look down on the poor in our own society now. They're lazy. They're poor because of their own laziness, their own inability or unwillingness to work. All they do is drink. When in reality, it was mainly the oppression that was causing the problems. So for a whole host of reasons, one of them being a famine that the British really caused. But he's presenting this as, oh, isn't it a shame that these women have to deal with this? He goes on, and again, he's trying to sound very reasonable here in this satirical way. I think it is agreed by all parties that this prodigious number of children in the arms, that 10 is a typo, I think it is agreed by all parties that this prodigious number of children in the arms or on the backs or at the heels of their mothers and frequently of their fathers is in the present deplorable state of the kingdom a very great additional grievance. And therefore, whoever can find a fair, cheap, and easy method of making these children sound and useful members of the Commonwealth would deserve so well of the public as to have his statue set up for a preserver of the nation. So he is saying that this is such a huge problem that whoever can solve it should have literally a statue put up and be called the preserver, the savior of the nation. So that's what he's trying to do. He is, because he is such a good person and he cares so much about these people, these poor parents and the nation as a whole, that he needs to save people. He needs to teach us, like, what can we do? How can we make things better for everyone? And he makes what he refers to as a modest proposal. Okay. So there's this gradual escalation that you're going to see here of what he says, and it is wild. You should totally read the. It's actually hilarious, but like in the darkest way possible. So he writes, I shall now, therefore, humbly propose my own thoughts, which I hope will not be liable to the least objection. So, I'm just a reasonable person. I am going to present a solution, and I don't think anybody can object to this because it's such a reasonable solution. Because I'm such a reasonable person. And then this is where things take a turn. I have been assured by a very knowing American of my acquaintance in London. So he's, it's the Americans. So I have been assured by a very knowing American of my acquaintance in London that a young, healthy child, well nursed, is, at a year old, a most delicious and nourishing, wholesome food, whether stewed, roasted, baked, or boiled. And I make no doubt that it will equally serve in a fricassee or a ragout. I don't know how to say that. But so he says, I offer this argument that no one can object to. And then he turns to, if you boil or bake a 1-year-old baby, it's healthy and nutritious. Who could argue with that? Right? I mean, I can see no problems with this perspective or what he's saying. So you can see where this is headed. I do therefore humbly, because I am humble, offer to public consideration that of the 120,000 children already computed, 20,000 may be reserved for breed. So I'm cutting a little bit here, but he's saying that there are approximately 120 children who are in this state. And what we should do is we should keep 20,000 of them. Just keep them for breeding purposes. Okay. We're going to take, 1 out of every 6 of these kids, and we're going to keep them, and we're going to use them to breed, to produce more humans. So what happens to the other 100,000? That the remaining 100,000 may, at a year old, be offered in sale to the persons of quality and fortune. So he's saying, when the kid turns 1, the parents can sell them, but not just sell them to anybody, sell them to the persons of quality and fortune instead of rich, wealthy people. To the persons of quality and fortune through the kingdom, always advising the mother to let them suck plentifully in the last month, so as to tender them plump and fat for a good table. A child will make 2 dishes at an entertainment for friends, and when the family dines alone, the fore or hindquarters will make a reasonable dish, and seasoned with a little pepper or salt, will be very good boiled on the 4th day, especially in winter. I don't know how many of you were familiar with this essay before I started talking about it, but I imagine that it's shocking, or hopefully should be. If it's not, yeah, that's concerning. But whatever. But so he writes this, and there's a lot more, by the way, and it gets intense. All right. No, it is satire. He's not actually making this as a proposal. He's trying to point out the hypocrisy of the British and the way they're thinking about and treating the Irish. But yeah, he takes it really far, and it's actually really funny. It's the funniest article about cannibalism you will ever read, at least top 5. So if we think about this, right, we think about his argument here, and then we go back to utilitarianism. Well, from a utilitarian perspective, right, human action designed to maximize pleasure, minimize pain for the individual, right? You're not considering other people's pleasure or pain, except in regards to how it affects you, right? It's an extremely individualistic perspective. Thought is calculative. We're thinking, all right, if we do this or I do this, what are the benefits to me and what are the costs to me? We are free to make our decisions, and we can act, without regard to this broader thing called society, because it doesn't exist. So from a pure, or at least I would argue, from a purely utilitarian perspective, so if the utilitarians are right, there shouldn't be any objections to Swift's modest proposal. If you are a utilitarian and you think and act in the way the utilitarians say that people act, what's the problem with what Smith, or Swift rather, is proposing? So I'm just going to end with this question of, or not this question, like, I just want to say, let's do it, right? Let's make this happen. Now, obviously, we're not talking about, like, if I say, let's make this happen, I'm not saying the Irish children in 1729. We have poverty now here in the US and all over the world, right? There are countries that are suffering due to a lack of resources. And we could help them. We could help them by encouraging them to follow this planet. We can do it here in the US too. There's nothing stopping us. So who's with me? Huh? 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 All right. I was intending to have a dramatic end there, but I'm having trouble finding the stop recording button. Oh, there it is.